the defaults
God.
the defaults need to be secure, so that we don't. And most people do not have the ability to use encryption properly. It's just uh,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
It was interesting earlier in relation to Dini's question, actually, when you talked about what's behind the infrastructure for even the basic text encoding. You're right, it isn't straightforward. Of course, if we're talking about fonts, we get into another level of sophistication with auto-kerning and all kinds of fancy things. And as Brundle, I think, has actually shown, you can program fonts to do cool things. But even, oh, I thought you had frozen, but thank God Andrew moved. Everyone else that was funny. Sorry. Yeah, but even the basic encoding isn't plain text. And one of the things that Fabian and I are working on now is the notion of text that is inherently interactable by a system. And that's why we look forward to talking to and listening to Jack Park and Marc-Antoine in a bit, where, like BibTeX, LaTeX, all of these things have meaning. But of course, even getting it to that stage is not straightforward. So yeah, that's cool. I think, Chris, for most of us, what you're talking about is a bit abstract now. And that is why it's so important that you talk about it, because if we manage to get some useful innovations in this community, it has to be able to work somewhere, right? So I thank you very much for that. Oh, Carl has typed something. Carl, because it's better for the record, do you mind speaking that as well, please?
No, sure. Sorry. Sometimes I have thoughts, and if somebody else is speaking, I don't want to interrupt them, and so I just will put it in the chat.
No, of course, that's good.
But yeah, any digital file is going to have minimum, like at least one layer of abstraction, even if it's just the binary encoding to put it on the disk. So like some layer of abstraction or specialized encoding, or we have to have this in this certain way, and it's not if it's not a tablet or a piece of printed text in front of me, then it's not legible. Then that pulls us off of digital entirely. So it's I'm not sure that construction is overly helpful. Granted, in certain subdisciplines of computer science, when the layers of abstraction get so many deep, like 10, 15, 20, you can sort of lose sight of the underlying things that make it work, sort of the building blocks. And oftentimes that is the point, so that users can work with more complex systems without needing to know the basic building blocks. It works under the same principle of you can drive your car without knowing how the spark plugs work. But there's sort of a big divide and a sort of left right of the center line in computer science and education right now, which is a lot of people are really trying to teach the fundamentals of computer science, like graphics and circuit boards and things like that, that were taught as the core of computer science in the 80s and 90s. And most of that stuff is simply not useful to know anymore from a technical standpoint. I, as a programmer, don't need to know how the registers on my silicon chip work. I just need to know how to write code, unless I'm taking apart my machine. And components are so specialized now that even if I understand how my graphics card work, and it's so small and so specialized that I can't really make modifications to it. I could maybe solder something and repair it, but I'm not going to make any significant changes. So abstraction is fine. It's obviously better to have a theoretical understanding of the stuff underneath the highest abstract layers, so that if you ever find yourself at a lower layer, you're not completely lost. But it's not required, I think, to really function at that high level.
This leads us very nicely back to kind of the core of the Future of Texts project, which is, one of the reasons I like PDF, and there are many reasons I don't, but one of them is you can actually print it out and then scan it in, do OCR, and you've lost nothing. And I think that's an important archival reason, which is interesting because, of course, PDF extraction of text, depending on how it's encoded, can be really, really messy. And one of the things that we get into is the issue of ligatures. They're really beautiful, but if the ligature in the metadata, if there is no ligature in the metadata, but there is in the data, it doesn't connect. So, those actual built into the typography itself issues are quite fascinating. But I do hope that I can arm wrestle enough with Fabian particularly that we can have knowledge objects of sorts that are pure text in an environment, and then it gets optimized when it is in a higher dimension, so to speak. So that's kind of exciting. Any other issues around this, around the distributed environment?
I do want to say I'm interested in this, Chris, because one of the things I'm trying to do with the museum and library that I've built, we managed to containerize it, which was a big deal. Right now, originally we had built it in Samvera, which is an out-of-the-box system that museums and libraries use to do repositories, make them available. And we found it was distributed all over the server. We couldn't pull it together and share that very easily with anyone. So then we just hand coded the whole thing. And now it's containerized. So we can actually send it out. The whole museum can be shared around the world in a zip file, right? So less than a terabyte. And so once we do that, though, I mean, once we're able to move this around, the question then is how do we keep people from taking that information? There's a lot of things that are copyrighted in there that we don't want people downloading. So how do we make sure that it's not hackable and we share it properly? So thank you for your comments. That helps us a lot. I think understand a little bit better about some of the stuff we're facing, some of the challenges.
Yeah, one actually thing on that note, I think something that we don't do today is we don't encrypt information, private information, at creation time and then never change. Like, so if you have something that's immutable that you potentially would want to be private at a given point, it should be encrypted at the moment that you create it with its own content key per entity. And that way you have full control. You don't have to worry about like, oh, if I back this up, is it going to be, do I encrypt the backup? No, the original information is already encrypted. So you can put it anywhere. And as long as the keys are safe, that makes it a lot easier to manage, I think.
So we're coming up to 10 to the hour. Jack, you are here just with video off, right? Oh, maybe he's gone to get some tea. I just thought that maybe we should spend 5 minutes or so, Fabian, where we quote unquote sell each other's approaches to what we're doing now for context for what Jack will be talking about. So just so they kind of see him and Marc-Antoine what they're talking into, so to speak. Might be useful.
I got things to show and pitch if need be.
Yeah, please do. But Chris, in thanking you, I have one more question from you, and that is there anything you want us particularly to think about right now in terms of what we will try to make real?
I'd like to come up with a prototype soon, so maybe we can play with something. That would be, I think, and it'd be good to have a continued discussion on some of these low-level details, but also how they fit into the broader user interactive paradigms to understand like what the actual needs are in terms of again, these I think there are pieces that could be, and so that's, I can't say, hey, everyone should use this particular, you know, piece of technology. It's on GitHub somewhere. Hopefully soon. That's, you know, I might prototype this using like IPLD. That's something that could be used in fairly short order, I think. I'm not sure how alive that project is at this point, because that was back in the like maybe 2018-ish or so. That was kind of at its peak, the decentralized movement kind of before AI dropped. It became the new hot thing. So I don't know. I need to research where some of those other projects are at.
Okay, that sounds eminently reasonable. Hi, Jack. We're expecting Marc-Antoine in about 10 minutes, right?
As I understand it, yes, he was not going to be here today, but something in his schedule loosened or whatever. So he said he'd be in at the top of the hour.
That's great. So what we'll do then is Fabian wants to present something now, which is wonderful. And then afterwards, Fabian and I, because we're working on two complementary aspects, will spend 2 or 3 minutes each telling you what we're attempting to do. So that may help clarify how you talk about the great work that you guys been doing to us. But we'll wait for Marc-Antoine to do that bit.
That totally makes sense. Marc-Antoine has taken where I started with topic mapping and blossomed it out into an entire space. And there's a lot to say. I have one slide which I will present, which is the topic mapper's view of objects. And you had requested that I talk about objects, and so I'm going to give you the topic mapper's view, and just to anticipate all of the future conversations, you need to understand that an LLM only understands an object as a collection of pixels. A image of a glass. It doesn't know what a glass is. It just knows about the pixels. And we have to get way beyond that. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Fabian had to step away for a second. Oh, okay, Rob.
Can I ask if we can introduce Jack? Because I've not met him before.
Oh,
Hi,
yes,
Jack.
I can
I'm
do
Deanie.
that. I can introduce
Can we
Jack.
do some introductions? Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, we should absolutely go around the table and do introductions, all of us. That would be very useful. Thank you, Deanie. I'll introduce Jack now, half of it. Jack will do the rest himself. And then when Marc-Antoine is here, I guess we can all do, all of us, and he can do himself. But Jack, I've known Jack for longer than either one of us would like to admit. We both worked with Doug Engelbart in different ways. Jack is a master of working with connecting knowledge in different ways, and that is why he's here. Jack, please give a more detailed account of that, please.
Well, I think that this is ancient history, by the way. I mean, this goes back 24, 25 years. The first time I met Frode was either when he walked into SRI one day, or it was at an Engelbart event of some kind. And I thought it was interesting because he was coming in from London, and that's a long way to play with Engelbart. But Doug told me that they had regular phone calls, so I thought this guy's got to be Engelbartian, and so we've sort of known each other ever since. Basically, I started out in aero engineering. I actually wanted to be a test pilot and all of that, but I only have one eye, so the military didn't like me. So I built my own airplanes and flew them. But what happened is that I married a woman who was interested in a horse farm, and I thought about wind power for the horse farm. And windmills are nothing but gliders with bearings, and I'm an aero engineer, so I know about that. But then people started saying, how do you know about the wind? Which got me into microprocessors and artificial intelligence. And the next thing you know, I'm now a computer jock and not an aero jock. And that's where Frode and I met was in the salad days of SRI International. SRI International was the company that Doug worked at in the late 50s and early 60s. And he basically changed the way we think about the world. But he's only known mostly for the mouse. And that's kind of sad because his ideas go so much deeper. So that brings me up to date. Somewhere in there, I got involved with an artificial intelligence company, which then led to the SRI company. And the AI company funded me to participate in the development of a new kind of topic map platform. And so I bring topic maps to the table today.
Jack, that's wonderful. Can you please explain what a topic map is?
So let's have some fun with this. You're all kind of familiar with concept maps. The concept map is some bubbles and labeled arcs between them. Kids in grammar school do that, and that's how they kind of learn about the world. There's something known also as a mind map. And mind map is the bubbles with arcs, but there's no label on them. Now, topic maps go a step further. They map, except the labeled arc is not a labeled arc, it's a topic itself. And this turns out to be very important. So what is a topic map? It's a way of capturing subjects and their relationships and their biographies and all of the rest of it associated with them. And you'll see a diagram of that shortly. I mean, does that help?
Yes, that absolutely helps. And in the 3 minutes before Marc-Antoine is here and we start, Fabian, please take over.
I present myself or I show stuff?
Both, please.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'm Fabian and I'm a prototypist, which, as I've joked with some of you before, is my excuse not to put any software in production and letting me tinker with everything and anything in order to learn. I mostly do it at the moment with things like this, your headset, your glasses, because despite the hype at the moment, I'm rather convinced being able to spawn a world in front of you it's mind-blowing. It's crazy. It's not perfect, but I think that's what I'm excited with. And I'll try to show you, if screen sharing works, to share what I've been doing this week. So let me know. Can you see the screen? Yeah. So the first part, just to give a little bit more context, we had quite a few discussions about bringing content to VR. And basically the idea is, let's bring files to VR. So I have a little server on my desktop. And some of you have seen this before because I've shown a bit it last week. But I can drag and drop files that are not just 3D models. They can be. And that's the file name. Here you can see on my desktop, I drag and drop an image and I have the image in the VR headset. I can do it with GLB, so 3D models, and I can do it with quite a few files. I find, so you see the 3D model there. So I find it not as exciting as doing VR proper, let's say, but a lot of files we have on our, so I can bring the content also of a file, the text file here, plain text, and quite a few other formats. I started to do conversion, so things that are not usually supported, like PDF, especially for the context of the Sloan Foundation grant. Academic publications often are in PDF, but other things like SVG, so that you can have things on it. Drawings too, like ODG, presentation, like PowerPoint-like, let's say, that can become PDF, 3D models, HTML too, EPUB, which, as you can see, grow to something a bit monstrosity because you had hundreds of pages, which led to viewers or players where you can go to the previous or next page and set of viewers when you can have multiple documents with multiple exploration of them. I also made my own file extension. I think I've never done that before because drag and drop of files on desktop to bring it to VR is nice, but if you detect what kind of file it is, then you can make up your own file and then process them however you want. So I was mentioning to Frode for the white paper, I had some ideas. I speak them to my phone, which transcribed them. And then that set of transcription can be, again, just drag and drop. A lot of it, honestly, has been surprisingly efficient last week, meaning not any kind of files is supported, but with things like Pandoc, you have like a ton of kind of files, like BibTeX, like PDF, even Excel files if you want to do this. And finally, and I think Brando also will appreciate, where is it actually? Those don't necessarily look like documents. So I tried to make them, look like documents. Brendel did some demo about this in the past, but now it looks like an open book, basically. So it's a research paper, but I just apply like a little curve on it. And you can flatten them. You can pinch in the corner to eventually pull a corner to not yet, but potentially turn the pages. So to try to bring some like affordances we're used to things that have been flattened out. Voilà.
Thank you, Fabian. That was obviously phenomenal. It's just really, by the way, Marc-Antoine, you can't see me very much because I had to go on emergency mobile phone. So a quick little hello. My bandwidth is atrocious, but it's being fixed, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I'm so grateful you're here. I'm just going to do a few seconds on Fabian and then it's over to Jack and Mark. Jack has done his introduction, which was great. So we look forward to you, Marc-Antoine. So Fabian, I'm just going to say what I saw, just to make it crystal clear, because it's wonderful. One of the issues, of course, is how you get stuff from a traditional computer into a headset. And that is what you do. This thing works everywhere. I've tried it on my Macintosh computer, installed the thing, clicked a few things with Fabien's help, and it just works. So it's something that should be insanely easy, but isn't. That hopefully, now that we're going to learn more from Jack and Marc-Antoine about things of knowledge, that we can move things better around. Right. Sorry, just looking at the text here. Virtual desktop, kind of. The language that we've been using on the side here is these things, entities or nodes or topics or whatever they are in different environments, they need to go from 2D to 3D and in different 3D environments, but also the relationship between them, even if it's purely spatial or if it's spatial with a topic or a line or whatever, this needs to be transferable. Something that one might think would be easy. I use the term knowledge sculptures because it's a bit neutral. But we need to develop means through which we can pass them around. Fabienne, say that in an intelligent way, please.
No, but it's so virtual desktop, also for a bit of context for people who are not aware of it, you basically mirror your desktop on your VR headset, which is in itself is super useful and it's even important, but you don't bring the files to the headset. You don't touch the file. You just, but you mirror the display or part of the display is inside your 3D world. But let's say if you pick a document, like you don't actually pick a document, as far as I know. You can aim at the projected 2D space in the 3D world that is enabled by your VR headset. But so one way I'm excited by VR is, again, you spawn a world in front of you. So if you spawn a world that is a sheet or a plane, I mean, it's useful, again, if you fly and then you have a giant screen in front of you, it is nice, but you don't have a volume. It's like, let's say, a cave, the old school kind of VR. It is impressive and it is cool, but it's not a volume, and you cannot step in it, you cannot grab things in it. So it's very important indeed to make that distinction that now the documents, even though they're flattened down, like they are basically images now, but it's still not a screen inside the 3D world. Like each of the individual documents can be manipulated. So that's I would say, the main difference with a virtual desktop, which is still a useful thing, but it's one flat.
I'm very glad that that question came up, because you would think that once you have something in a space, you have something in a space, but you just don't. It's literally a projection. And that's what we're trying to get beyond today. Brandel, unless it's specific, yeah, okay, and then we go on to introduction, but Brandel, please.
Yeah, so I did want to talk about the sort of the virtual desktop question, and it's Fabian's absolutely correct in that a virtual desktop is not typically a 3D spatial representation. So at its very least, you would probably call it a spatial desktop. But I think more importantly, a desktop per se, as people talk about it, doesn't have in it a very rich implied repertoire of actions or information. So I was talking to my daughter the other night about playing chess and said, you can play chess in Finder or Windows Explorer with somebody, by just moving icons around in a folder. But that's not what people think of it as for, and people think that it's bizarrely subversive, which is, fun for her. But so despite the fact that positional information can have significance within the context of something like a Finder or a desktop, it mostly doesn't. And so there are places where there are stronger or weaker implications that space has meaning. And I think one of the things that Fabian is sort of honing in on is the making space important and making relations more important than is typically represented in a desktop metaphor, be it 2D or spatial. So it's beyond an extended desktop, and it's also beyond a desktop in terms. So that's not to say that people couldn't use that information, but that's the way I kind of read it.
It's very important that this was brought up, because there's one more side to that, and that is, while thinking about what these entities, nodes, or knowledge objects should contain, we've been looking at using the analogy of icons on a desktop, where it's really easy for anybody to move them around and all of this stuff. But unless you have the software, you can't open them. So what's inside these things is quite separate from the representations that you see. So I'm glad we got through that. But okay, Fabian, one more thing, and then we do introductions.
Yeah. So super quickly to also address about transferring the file to the headset. Yes, indeed, you can transfer file, but then you get a file, and if you don't open like a terminal that is typically outside of the headset, the file sits there. You cannot interpret it like being a PDF, but for sure an XLS file or a BibTeX file, you can't do anything with it. So indeed, there are two aspects to it. There is the companion app, let's say on the desktop, that allows you to send files, to check that they are new or not, etc., convert them if it's the format that is totally alien. But then you have the WebXR, which is the page that's going to get that information. And that information then that's why you have the viewers/players. If it's too big a document, next page, previous page. And once you have, let's say, a concept of viewer, you can do extracting page or whatever, again, you can come up with. But yes, the goal is the files are not files sitting on the headset, they are manipulable content. And yeah, just tiny thing to conclude. It's been a strange week for me because I did not expect this to work. And by respecting super simple things, yes, but it's true. Simple things like file system, content type, MIME type, it opens so many possibilities. So I'm mostly processing not from a technical part, but from an intellectual part, because just earlier, like literally 45 minutes ago, I wrote let's say, file name, let's say beach.live.rm, because it's the extension for remarkable. So I sketch on this. By adding .live in the file name, it prevents any kind of caching. So whenever I update this, it's going to update in the headset. Nothing miraculous per se, but just because it's handled by the file name and sent to the file system, like again, super old technology, decades and decades, but it just works. And I'm like, oh shit, that works. So now what can I actually do with it? How can I include that in my workflow? So I think it's yeah, I'm a bit too excited, but it's been a wild ride week, but it's good.
That was very interesting, Fabian. Thank you. So, please introduce yourself. And Marc-Antoine, you're last because you are newest here. So that means you get to hear who we are before you know how you want to present yourself. Or do you want to go first? I don't know what's better.
Uh, uh, did you already present yourself? In which case, I feel embarrassed that you have to do it over again for me.
No. Most
No.
of us are here every week. So, okay. Well, let's just start with Fabian and go through. So, Marc-Antoine, you get a good idea who these brilliant people are. Fabian, intro, please.
Okay, sure. So I'm still a prototypist, as I was half an hour ago. I'm excited by prototyping because things like this that sadly prevent me from sleeping, which is a bit like going on a hike and you keep on walking and then you discover you're nowhere near to the summit, so you need to keep on climbing and climbing. But it's done by building pieces of software and or hardware. So that's just accelerating, and I focus on doing this in VR and AR because I think it's just it's mind blowing. Like you put a headset, you're somewhere else. It has so many drawbacks, but like a couple of $100 and it fits in your backpack. It's just ridiculous, and that we can build on things with this again, like program it. I find that's what is most exciting, even though not really sure where this is leading in terms of technical and intellectual exploration. But to me, this is the locus of intellectual, I don't want to say power, but ability to explore new things. Voilà.
Thank you, Fabian. And on my screen, Chris, you are next.
Yep, so I'm an independent researcher. My formal background is in databases and distributed systems, and did a little bit of work in the defense industry along those lines with a communication system. There's General Dynamics. Been out of industry for a while, doing my own thing. So, yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Carl, please.
I assume it's just me this time, not the other Carl.
That's right.
I'm a PhD student at Mississippi State University. I have gone back to school after writing VR simulation software for the Army Corps for about 3 years. Decided I wanted to do more research, and specifically VR-based research for text entry paradigms that are software only. So no additional hardware peripherals, no controllers, mostly hand tracking. And that requires redefining and getting away from QWERTY and converting it into 3D. And that is what I'm working on currently.
Thanks, Carl. And Jack, we all know you, specifically Marc-Antoine. So Andrew, it's over to you.
Alrighty. I'm Andrew. I am, like Fabian, one of the WebXR developers, though I do much less prototyping. I'm mostly in charge of the development for I guess our air quotes main project right now. And that's simply because we have these wonderful meetings, ideas get thrown around, and then they get passed to me to develop into our project, the Sloan Grant. So I'm doing most of that. Less of a thinker, more of a just take it and go type of person.
No.
Deanie's making a face at
No.
me in this context.
No.
But yeah, I enjoy doing this.
You're certainly not an overthinker, but your input is always greatly appreciated and well thought through. So I'm a big no with Deanie. I agree with you, Deanie.
He is an overthinker. Oh my gosh, you just don't know him like I do.
Okay.
I'm
Well,
so sorry. No, he works in my lab, so I know him very well, and I've known him since he was an undergraduate. He's brilliant, and that's why we brought him into the project. So shut up, Andrew and Foda. You can't say that.
well, I see overthinking is the bad thing where you never get anything done, but Andrew most certainly gets things done.
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
Okay, I'll take over now since you're kind of breaking up there. I'm
Please.
Deanie Griggar. I'm at Washington State University, Vancouver. I'm the academic in the room, I think. I work in XR from the art perspective. I have a virtual museum and library that my lab has built. I run the electronic literature lab here at the university. And we do a lot of work with VR in that project. And Andrew is building that out for us. We have a little small grant from the university to do that work so that we can do this for GLAM organizations, hopefully. I'm also the lead PI in the Sloan Foundation grant with Froda. And we're finishing up year one. We have one more year and that will be complete. Thank you.
What do you mean one more year? One more year of the initial grant. It'll go on forever. Anyway, Deanie, thank you. And then it's Brandel before Marc-Antoine gets the floor.
Hi, my name is Brandel. I have been working on prototyping, reading, and writing in virtual reality for the last 9 years. Working very particularly with the notions of embodied cognition and extended mind, recognizing that the way that we think with our hands and our bodies is so intrinsic to the way that we can process information based on the sort of the environments that we evolved within. That if we can have a more embodied context for what we do with information that also happens to be digitally mediated, then we will be able to relate to it in a much better way. Also, for the last 10 years, I've been working at Apple, and for the last 4 or so, I've actually been responsible for the spatial web standards. So I am specifically responsible for how the internet will be developed for things like Apple Vision Pro and for the Quest. And in that, I've been developing the sort of the brief, the specification and all of the technical details for the HTML model element, something that will allow people to be able to put 3D models intrinsically into the web. And I sort of gate crashed this community about 3 years ago to make sure that people recognize that space is an intrinsic component of information, and that now that we have such cheap, ubiquitous tooling for that, then it sort of obliges us to pursue what prototyping that entails and what the consequences can be.
Okay.
I was just going to say, how amazing is this room? So Marc-Antoine, please go ahead and introduce yourself. It's been a long time. I've known you for, it seems like forever. I'm very, very happy to see you again today.
Good to see you as well. Marc-Antoine Parent, I've worked on in earlier lives on natural language processing and on information visualization. But my main interest past 8-9 years-ish has been collective intelligence and how do people aggregate or rather negotiate shared understanding scale. We have very good protocols for small groups to reach an agreement. They don't scale at all. Decision making at scale usually goes through delegation or vote, which doesn't allow iteration. So the question is really how to help people, in a way, absorb more information so that they understand the diversity of perspectives that is out there. My perspective on this, and we'll get into the presentation core, but I'm not sure pure text is the best way to do this. So I've been looking at mix of text and more structured knowledge objects. And well, as I said, we'll get into the beginning. I've been, concretely, I worked on a project with the European Commission on a shared data format for collective intelligence with Open University. It was financed by the European Commission, not with them as such. And since then, I've been pretty much working in the lab trying to get going on. And he got me into the topic mapping. And we both had a vision of an ecosystem for this. And we've been pursuing different aspects of what is an ecosystem of federated knowledge like. We actually met in a federated knowledge, preparing for a federated knowledge conference. So Jack, how do you want us to tell the story of, or what do you, first, Frodo, what do you expect us to share beyond presentations?
First of all, what you've already said is so worthwhile. It's incredible. Only a few minutes, and it's already useful. Today, I would really like to learn two things. One of them is the basic technical stuff, because when it comes down to the simplest thing, if there is such a thing as a knowledge object, a thing in this space, if you were to send one to me, what would it actually be? What would, the structure you talked about, what would be in it? Because we do not want to reinvent stuff here badly. We would like to learn from you. So that's on the technical, prosaic level. Above that, the way that you talk about what these maps are would be really, really useful, because the key thing for me with XR headsets, VR, AR, is not that they're amazing. That's clear. It is that they give us an excuse to think and dream again. Jack and I have been trying to get some Doug's things happening for decades. Nobody cares. Now we have headsets, it's 3D. It's kind of an excuse. So a lot of what you guys have been doing in 2D, putting it into 3D may open it up and explode it. And I feel that my particular job is to help making sure that people with all kinds of software can make these knowledge object entities, whatever we call it, and give it to someone else. That's the key thing. Not just give a flat presentation, not just give something dead, not just publish it, share knowledge objects and structures. That was a long answer. I hope it's helpful. Please go ahead. I will mute and enjoy the show.
Jack, are you okay with me answering those questions first, or?
What I wanted to do, since Froda asked me and I invited you in, so I'm not going to upstage what you got to say, because it's vastly critical to what these people want to hear. But he over complimented me with a bunch of bullshit about how great I am and all of the rest of it.
Not bullshit.
And so I want to honor that line of reasoning by just saying where I came from, and that anchors everything you're going to say. That's how I see it. Does that make sense? Okay. Do I have the ability to share screen?
It should be open for you, yes.
I see it, yes. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. What I want, give me a second. Things are amazing how they get clobbered. Okay, I'm going to try this, and then you tell me. This is the screen I'm going to share, and then I'm going to try and bring this to the foreground. Now, do you see the topic map structure?
Perfect.
We see your PowerPoint window, yes.
Yes, that's what I care about.
Yes.
The I make the claim that objects, be they ineffable, abstract, or concrete, all the way down to the brand of shoes you're wearing, exist in relations. That's how it works. And I'm not good with names, but somebody brought for the foreground the idea of bringing relations out. Well, a topic map, beyond any other kind of map, you're looking right now at the equivalent of a concept of a mind map. There are labeled nodes, but not labeled arcs. Okay, that's a mind map. If I put the labels on them, like for example, you see over here, you have an actor and an actor type, that label might be ISA. Okay, so there is a relationship between an actor and its type, and its type is an abstract thing, but it exists in some universe of relations. So a topic map tries to make explicit all of the relations that any object, so this actor is one of your knowledge objects, but you can't take the actor standalone because it exists in any number of relations, and it also exists in numbers of role types. So there's a casting of the person sitting in a court as the driver of the getaway car. You see, people will know the person by the fact that they saw them as the driver of the getaway the car. They don't know who that person is, but they know him as that role player. And every relation in the universe has a biography. It's got provenance and it's got all kinds of other stuff going on. Take Froda as an actor. When I first met him, he was unmarried. I know him today as married. So there's a situational change in his relationships. That means that things don't exist just in 3D, they exist in 4D because relations change. And those changes have biographies. So that's the anchor of where I am coming from. And I'm going to stop there. Let me stop sharing my screen. And if anybody has any questions to me, I'll take them, and then I'm going to turn it over to Marc-Antoine, who is the grandmaster of this space.
Just wanted to thank you, Jack. That was really clear and mind refreshing.
Okay. So the question is, what does it look like technically? Let me talk about the goals first. So the goal is to have knowledge objects that are ideally composable, because if you're going to combine and aggregate and learn from a very large, diverse group of people, you want things that you can compare, contrast, and compose as much as possible. Now, I'm not saying, and be aware, a lot of this is very early work in progress. I've been at it for some time, and I'm converging, but it's not finished. So I'll be hand waving a bit, honestly, but the point is to be as formal as possible. And the point is, we have composable knowledge objects already in science. Like we know how to formalize ideas as mathematical formula, as biology has done a lot to create like enzymatic reactions as knowledge objects and to write pathways as knowledge objects that can be combined. But each discipline has its own formal language. And these formal languages take a lot of time to learn. And nobody masters all the formal languages. And that's up to a point as it should be. I mean, they reflect, a discipline. And the reality is we can't expect everybody to learn all the formal languages. It's not going to happen. So the whole point is, can we help people to go from informal, imprecise thought and progressively and in a crowdsourced way slowly progress towards something more formal that can be put in a quote unquote knowledge-based knowledge graph. Now, I'm not doing traditional knowledge graphs because I'm doing topic maps. That means each anything that happens is a frame as such. And think of Minsky frames very much, but also, I've been studying argumentation frames by Walton. I've been studying Ervin Goffman's frames. Or Lakoff's frames. They're very different. They're not the same frames. But what they have in common is there's a kind of schema and there's certain roles in the schema and you put things in the schema. But what they also have in common that I don't think has been done so much before is the reality is each frame has subframes. When you have, say, the Lakoff has very high level frames such as nurturing parent. But in the nurturing parent, there's the whole implicit subframe of parenthood in and of itself. And what does it mean to be nurturing and all the various expectations about development. So there's a lot of implicit knowledge in anything you say. So for me, a knowledge object never exists in a vacuum. It's always a bit of a Russian doll nested thing, fractalish. But what's important also is it's always negotiated. I will take a bit of text or conversation or video like we have here and think, okay, what are the I can find in there? And those are interpretations. They're my interpretations of what happens there. And the question is, will other people share these interpretations? And I don't think there's ever going to be one closed final frame language. There's going to be multiple frames. And then the question is, how do we translate between frame language? So I think what we need is first a kind of substrate of basic frame relationship. We have some frames are generalizations of one another. There's containment. I spoke about the fact that a frame contains implicit subframes. We have things such as causality, epistemic, like we know this because this. Of course, reasoning, other argumentation frames are part of that story. In a way, one important domain of frames in linguistics have been basically all verbs are frames at a certain level, very low level frames, but these are all things we're dealing with. So on the one hand, this is about saying, can we share a frame with understanding that these build on basic building blocks that can become a bit of a lingua franca. Even if we create new frames, can we express it in terms of basic frames, again, causality, epistemic, reasoning, so on. And the other thing is, these things are always negotiated in a collective intelligence context. We're saying this is debated. This is a consensus view. This is a marginal view. This is contested. A lot of people hanging both sides, or it's a agnostic. Like most people don't have a clear idea about this. So there's a kind of, in a way, people against, people for, and we get a quadrant of all the possible positions about a frame. So whenever you come to a frame, what you want to see is what is its neighborhood, right? And people who agree, disagree in terms of causal relations, epistemic relations, superframes, subframes, and evolution, because that's really what's important. Frodo, you were saying it can't be static. People are saying, oh, I think this frame could be improved this way. I think this would be more precise. And this is where the progressive formalization happens. People will start with text. Text is the natural language happens, but natural language is ambiguous. Natural language is like there's false consensus all the time. And this is why it's worth, for communication purpose, also I spoke of aggregation, but it's worth being more formal and saying, oh, I do mean this concept. So what this means, and this is really the important point and where I think so far, this is stuff you must have heard before. But what I'm really working on is a mechanism for evolving identity. So if I create a frame and I give it an identifier, probably a URL, and link data, because I'm a big link data fan, at some point, I'll change my mind about it and I'll have an iteration of it. Or somebody will propose an iteration. Think of it like a pull request. And here, it's important that, because I believe in provenance and not losing things, this means that, yes, this frame shouldn't move because people will still refer to it, but there's, okay, here's possible next versions. Then you look at the social consensus about this. And in my version, I'll say, well, this is really the one I care about. And most people do. So, okay, this is really a natural evolution. Most people agree. So we can say this is now the new version of the same concept, but remembering the provenance nonetheless. Or if there's a divergence, no, I saw it this way, I saw it this way, and this is really the important point. You say, okay, this was the naive concept. It wasn't aware of this distinction. And you make the distinction into a frame saying, well, according to this actor being interpreted this way or that, or this, this more refined interpretation, you can interpret this way or that. And which did you mean when you were referring to it? So people would be alerted. This frame was deemed a posteriori ambiguous. There was a distinction that was proposed, and you will get a signal that you were using an ambiguous frame, and please update your references so that you refer to the more precise concept. If you want, maybe in some cases, the ambiguity was intentional, you were abstracting, but the abstraction of the difference is not the same as the naivety about the difference. So there's kind of, the old object that was naive, the two or more possibilities, and the abstraction about them. So this is what I'm trying to do. In terms, so what does it look like? It will be, of course, probably a JSON LD object or whatever people are comfortable with, but I will try to maintain compatibility with JSON LD because I think it works really well. But the most important part of it is it will contain references to something that has a life, that is dynamic, that has a lifetime, but that also has a history. So you can say, I was pointing here at that moment, so it has to have a timestamp. And that means if I review and, the thing has evolved and I'm okay with the evolution because it's been so far consensus evolution, I'll just update my timestamp. Okay, I'm up to date. And if I see that there's been a distinction, I will update the reference as well as the timestamp. So this is the core of what I'm proposing. Now, visually, I spoke of a few fundamental axes, causality, epistemic, reasoning, and so on. I'm working a bit on, this is going to look horrible. I'm not good at prototyping. Sorry, but I'll still give you an idea. This is something very experimental I'm working with. Oh, the share button. Okay, good. So imagine each of those lines having beads, colored beads. And basically, this would be kind of an axis, so causality. And this would be, say, for example, blue would be premise, orange would be conclusion, and green would be adjuvant, or something like that. There's roles, so each role would have a color. And then the idea is each of these claims, which are represented primarily as text for intelligibility, each line is a different claim, would play many roles in many frames. So I'm just superposing them in one line. And then I'm saying, okay, let me click on one. And then that means only a subset of things connected to that one are active. The other ones are grayed out. So this is in at least one frame in this role. And then if I can click on this role and say, okay, it is in the frame where here is the premise and here's the conclusion. Um, and here's another one. Just I could click on another one. And then I could, oh, sorry, green was the conclusion, apologies. And then I can even, and this is important, materialize the frame on the line and say, well, this is the frame as a frame, and make that black circle to be, well, this is not the actors, but the frame itself. Now, and here it's assumed selected, so everything is not related to this specific frame is grayed out. So this is very primitive, but what I'm trying to do is imagine that this is happening on all the lines, and I have all these mechanisms for if there's too many lines and too many types, and what happens when you have nesting, but I didn't make the maquettes for those. Where's the stop sharing? This is one attempt. There's going to be many attempts. I don't believe that there's going to be one UX. This is a UX that tries to give a lot of information at once, and as such, it's a bit of a learning curve. What is important to me is another thing I don't have a maquette for is, of course, in a text, I'd expect each bit of text that's interpreted as a frame to have a little sign, and then you could have the lines near the text and say this goes here, and oops, you could click on that and see everything it's connected to in the parallel lines. So this was the more structural view, but it can be connected to existing text. The point is, there's going to be many interpretations, there's going to be many readings, and it's important that every time you look at a frame, and I'm thinking also of a card interface for the frame, so here's the frame and all the actors, and presenting it more with the accompanying text. But what's important is always showing everything it can be connected to. And then you get into priority, moderation, how do you decide what's the most important? But I think what is the most important, first is what is most contentious, where there is the most disagreement, because this is where conversation needs to happen. And making that very visible for me is part of the UX direction. There's more to say. The most important point, sorry. The most important point, of course, is this has to be a federation. Not everybody will use one tool. It's an ecosystem. But what we need is, I think, of course, to be able to point to bits of text or bits of knowledge objects in knowledge structures like knowledge graphs. Either we already have ways to point into bits of text, right? We have the web annotation standard for that. If you use linked data, we can point to knowledge objects. But what's important, I think, is to be able to realize that these are mostly immutable objects, and when they evolve, we have to have a way to know, is that really what I meant, or did the understanding change, and be able to make those connections and make that explicit. Yes, Frode.
Yeah, this is wonderful. It's much more expanding than I expected, so thank you. Also on the basics, let's say, here's part of the problem, and it's a real world problem. It's not a problem that you've made, obviously. Let's say we want to share some aspect or some collection of these topics. What is the means to do that? Right? The context of which I ask you is if we share a citation in academic documents, we might often use BibTeX. So that's a way we're sending, you send something that is a BibTeX, someone can paste it into their thing and it'll be there. Might there be an equivalent of something you could use, or that you use, that has fields that can be shared? Sorry, yeah.
I did say I'd expect something like JSON LD as a unit of exchange. I think what's really important is, unlike BibTeX, like a BibTeX entry is very self-contained, and that's fine. And probably it'll be a character. I mean, I expect this to be a characteristic of a packaged knowledge object, of course. But what is important is the reference to live evolving data. It's about emerging concepts, it's about evolving concepts, it's about concepts being negotiated in a community. So it means those are references to something living on a linked open data servers. Now, of course, the package will have the references and will have enough content that, and a text representation. Of course, text representation is still meaningful. It's what we will use. But what is important is the realization that a package representation is always a snapshot and the concept is always ever evolving. So I don't know if that answers your question. Before I take Fabian and Brandel, very quickly, Obsidian, Carl asked about Obsidian. The Obsidian deals with text and with, you can, as the author, say this is a keyword referring to other keywords. When I speak of interpretation, I say anybody can come in and say, oh, this is relevant and this is how I interpret this. And this is, so I'm very much looking at external annotation things as a mechanism. The problem, of course, is if you're dealing with changing text, then you have to recalculate the references and so on and so forth. So there's a concrete difficulty there. If it's the author doing the editing, it's fine. There is a lot of work in CRDTs that may preserve things, but the reality is when the text moves enough, the old interpretation may no longer be valid, which is another reason to keep a snapshot of the old version and see, okay, how can that interpretation be? But there, I think this is one good use of AI. I'm not a big AI person in some ways, though I am looking very much at the use of AI for proposing readings and proposing, oh, you have this frame. Could it evolve into that frame, right? But also very much when the text evolves, is this frame that was found in this version still in that version, and what are the boundaries? I think this is something AI would be very, very good at, and no reason not to use it for these things. Where I do see a great role for AI also is when I speak of progressive formalization and people don't have the training, I think explaining a formal system to a layperson and helping guiding a layperson into, can you make your thinking more rigorous so we can slowly progress towards a formal language? I think their AI can have a wonderful role. Sorry, I've been Fabian and Brendel.
Yeah, thank you. And yes, absolutely. Fabian, please.
Thank you. Yeah, first of all, is to also take just a second to thank Jack and Marc-Antoine, because I tend to think that we go in the weeds, let's say, of, oh, what is a protocol, what is a file system, etc. I think it's important because otherwise it's just a discussion. And at the same time, if those discussions are not meaningful, impactful, if we don't think better, we're just manipulating bits and it's totally useless. So I think it's very good to have this kind of discussion and prompt us to step back, basically, like, why are we even doing all this? So yeah, I want to thank you for this. It also reminds me, I don't know if you're aware of Clément Vidal at the VUB in Brussels here. He wrote a philosophical identity card and wrote how can I make explicit my worldview and metaphilosophical criteria for worldview comparison. So worldview, for those who are not familiar with the term, it's basically your set of beliefs, roughly. Like, are you a materialist or not? And he was proposing, and he wrote a couple of papers on making your worldview not JSON, but basically a data structure that can be interpreted. And for example, to do a diff, like, what do you believe in? What do you believe today and you did not believe 10 years ago, etc. And I played a little bit the game with him and with myself, and I think it's very interesting. So being able to consider this and stepping back again to something bigger, but include those things that were usually implicit, I think it's quite valuable. So yeah, it's good again to ponder about this. And one last detail, I think the Fediverse works. I think if you're basically not Apple or Microsoft, that can push a format on people's will, because you just have the install base for it. Basically, it's nothing nefarious about it. Federation does help, and I think it's even for bigger player, even the biggest player. If you want to be inclusive, if you want to be encompassing of things you're not aware of yet, and thus actually learn from the process, I think Federation is extremely valuable on a daily basis, using the Fediverse and PeerTube and having all those. They're not just concepts, like they work today on a daily basis, and I think having this kind of approach here make total sense. So yeah, thanks again.
I'm sure you have comments on that one, Fabian. Excuse me, from Fabian, Marc-Antoine.
Not as well. First, thanks for the Clément Vidal. I was not aware of it. I'll definitely look into that. I think yes, it is hard for me as well to. I started very much from a protocol question. How do I exchange information about evolving knowledge and concepts? And I was very much trying to do the question of diffing viewpoints. By the way, I saw in the chat, Chris, about frames versus perspectives. For me, a perspective is a coherent set of frames. And it's totally an intent to have individual perspective information space and group perspective information space. And each group has its own aggregation rules. How do we decide that from individual perspectives and members of the groups that the group, yes, does agree to this? And that will be a group thing. But the federation, of course, doesn't try to reach a conclusion. It just tries to give a view of what people believe. But yeah, but yeah, I started very protocol based, and then it expanded into getting the questions right. Brandel?
So we have 9 minutes left. So Brandel and Jack.
I'll be fast, I promise. So this is really interesting, and like I said, the encoding sort of in a sort of visually Git-like way is an interesting sort of innovation. I often think that there's a lot that comes out of taking formalized sort of techniques and capabilities, often from commerce, but elsewhere as well, and then applying them to more conceptual things. You know, a lot of people have spilled a lot of ink talking about the way that accounting started writing, and then once we started using it for philosophical and theoretical things is when stuff really got started. Similar for graphs and things, that they started in commerce, and then once we started using them, we kind of got science, and that was exciting. So maybe it's computer science's turn to surrender its tools to the thinkers and see what the consequences are. But so to that end, like, who does this work and how, and what are the political consequences of it? Is this something where you would expect philosophers to be using their local install of Git argue, and or like, because there's the question of the map and the territory, like what is the time and the way in which this is actually formally encoded, and what is this, somebody's career is a Git history, or what falls below the threshold? Like, yeah, can you talk a little bit about the things between what I'm saying?
Scenarios, usage scenarios. I keep being asked, who is this for, and who will go to the trouble of making this? I think that on the one hand, anybody who speaks on behalf of a group of people, I often give the example of United Way. They speak on behalf of a lot of organizations, and they have to make demands that reflect the needs of all the organizations. And they are accountable for being good representatives. So being able to combine viewpoints from many constituents and being able to say, this is how we combine all these various, point issues into an overall platform. I think these are the people who have to be accountable for the decisions for many people. I think these are the people who really need to be able to trace their reasoning. I have my goal is that for this to be used for deliberative democracy, right? This is the dream. But even at a corporate level, we have ISO 9000, like, we're actually using the processes we say we are. I'd like to have an ISO 9000 for decisions. If you're in a partnership with another company, you want to know, why did you take that decision? and be accountable for it and be able to give the story of how you reach that decision. And if in fact you make it visible, I think there's a quote unquote market there. But I see also there's all this evolving, emerging field organizations and evolving organizations who try to be less hierarchical and do emergent decision making. They could use that. Certainly parties who want those who want their platform to be decided by their constituents, of course, an exceptional case. These are the kind of people who I think would have a justification to go through the trouble of that. Also, anybody learning, as I said, a formal language, like I think in a lot of groups, there are shy people who don't want to give ideas because they're afraid, oh, it's a half-baked idea. I'll look ridiculous. Well, being able to have a process, and here again, AI can help to make the idea more formal, confronting it to what is being decided before, what worked, what didn't work. The old idea of knowledge bases, which didn't live because it was too much trouble putting things into a knowledge base. Frankly, nobody bothered. It was nobody's job, and everybody's job, and hence nobody's job. But again, making this very aware of Lumio. But Lumio, again, works in language, in natural language. And I think what's really important here is allowing people to get more formal, because it means we get more precise sharing. Okay, Jack, you have something to add. I want to give you a chance.
Yeah, and I'm going to make this short. I'm going to play the steel manning game for just a moment, and that is to say that the Fediverse was mentioned, and I've been an enormous fan of Fediverse, but I'd like to make a comment in relation to the history of topic maps. The history of topic maps started out with an ISO standard 13250, which was in SGML, and so we mapped that out to XML. But the problem with it is that in the objects in a topic map were the topic itself, which was a proxy for any subject, an association, and an occurrence. Now that was modeled after the index in the back of a book. And the index of the back of a book is not a first-class object. It's about relations, but it's kind of not the story. So when it was all said and done, Steve Newcomb, the inventor of topic maps, had this epiphany, and he came up with something called the topic maps reference model, where he expunged topic mapping of all of its ontological commitments except two. The definition of a topic map, or he now calls them subject maps, is a container for subject proxies. So you have two objects, the subject map and the subject proxy. And he went into the subject proxy with these ontological commitments that you must display in a legend publicly those property values, those key value pairs that you use to identify this subject. That was all. He reduced an enormously complex standard down to two objects. And I'm going to claim that Fediverse is a wonderful idea, but it makes too many ontological commitments to things which stand in the way of federating the objects that Marc-Antoine are talking about. And so I'm just going to stop there.
Yeah, there's no question we could put knowledge objects on the Fediverse feeds. No reason not to. But the awareness of this object is a snapshot and how do you update it, that is kind of beyond the basic fediverse functions. One last thing before I know time is short, Frode. Yes, pedagogy is very important. We are working on a sense-making game, collective team game for sense-making. And right now it's classic IBIS tree building, but I want it to be successive refinements of concepts through this lens. So the pedagogy angle, I think, is really important there. Frode.
Well, first of all, thank you both. As I've already said, it was wider and deeper than I had even hoped for, so thank you. I do have a question though, and that is, imagine, I'm sitting here in my little library, so imagine if I have made a memory palace of all kinds of things all over the place, and one of them is this. Sorry, my phone is running out of battery and it's giving me power, so giving me internet, so that's important. Sorry. So let's say one of them is a map of knowledge. I'm not going to use any of your specific terminology because you mentioned topic maps, mind maps, and concept maps, and so on. If I want to give that to you, whether it's 2D or you're wearing a headset, how would you like it encoded? Probably JSON, that's fine. But what are the minimum fields that you would want there to be in for it to be useful in your world?
I think what's important for me is less a matter of fields than affordances. I mean, of course, every node and ideally link would have an identity because, one thing about nested maps is it's not just a graph, it's not just a hypergraph with n-ary relation, it's a recursive hypergraph because you can, when you, for example, do a metaphor, you're comparing this link in this situation is linked to this link in this situation. And so you make pointers to links. So it's a bit higher level. So ideally, everything has to have an identity. And ideally, they should have a history. Now, of course, I don't expect everybody to implement all of this. So I need to be able to have, graceful degradation otherwise. But it would be nice if. And also, of course, I would like to know when things are changed. So subscriptions are nice. But again, but yeah, what's important is everything has an identity. I'd like to know if this maps to frames. Well, let's have the translation map handy. And that way, I'm very inspired by the Ink and Switch Cambrian project, where they have a kind of universal JSON to JSON translation maps, which are composable. It's not that important technically. What is important is, I can consume your thing, but if you want to get something back from me, you have to be aware that I may be pointing to it as an overlay. So it won't be a modification, it'll be an overlay. And the overlay can be translated back to whatever format you're using, hopefully, but then that makes it static and know that this is a thing that may change under your the identity. You can get the identity history. So, oh, what is this identity now? Oh, it's this. So it's more about how you want to receive it rather than how I want to receive it.
That's an interesting perspective, and today is the deadline for contribution to the book. Of course, all of you, if you do want to send something in, of course you can have a few more days. For some of you, it's not optional, you just have to do it. But Marc-Antoine and or Jack, depending on whether you want to do it separately or together or not, if you want to write down basically what Marc-Antoine just said in a user guide for how to move stuff in and out, I would be extremely happy to include that. Whether you write it as prose, pictures, doesn't matter. It might be useful also for you to have something to refer to in the future of, at the middle of 2024, with the headsets arriving, this is one perspective, and that would be really, really appreciated.
Let's see what we can do in a few days.
Yeah, it would be wonderful. So I have a family commitment. I got to run, which is great, so we don't go on forever and ever. Thank you very much for the 2 hours today. Jack and Marc-Antoine, every Monday, same time. If you want to come in anytime, you're very, very welcome. And please note, people come and enter, people come late, leave early. It's absolutely no commitment to be here for the whole thing. It's very casual. So if you want to, it'd be great to see you again soon. All right, thanks again, and take care, everyone. Bye.